Look, being a buyer within the Toronto real estate market and GTA real estate market is hard enough as it is. Sure, you can listen to professionals or social media content creators on the market, such as myself or others out there, or work with professionals, as many of my clients do, to get a better understanding, and we can provide that understanding, but it's not an easy endeavor. But even more so than just being a regular home buyer within the Toronto real estate market, what's particularly tricky is being a condo buyer. That's right, if you are a buyer who's looking at condos within the Toronto condo market, there is a bevy of things to avoid, things to look out for, areas to avoid, buildings to avoid, builders to avoid, and other items of key consideration. Not necessarily things to avoid, but things such as, what is the appreciation of this building versus another building? This unit has a side kitchen. The other unit has a full-on proper kitchen with an island. What is a better bet in this particular community? There are a lot of considerations. But as always, my job as a Toronto real estate agent who actively works on the behalf of buyers and sellers within the GTA and real estate market is to simplify things as much as possible. And I thought, you know what? In today's video, let me touch on views Toronto condo buyers should avoid if possible. That's right, because in today's video, we're going to make a short list and go through the list with examples of exposures, views, basically what is in front of your unit's balcony or windows that should be avoided if possible. And hey, by the way, if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Sam, a Toronto real estate agent actively working with buyers and sellers across the GTA. On this channel, I like to discuss all things Toronto and GTA real estate market oriented, market stats, market trends, buyer advice, seller advice, pre-construction previews, Toronto condo building reviews, area analysis, and so much more. So if you find any of this content enjoyable, feel free to subscribe and give this video a like so you can stay tuned for more. Furthermore, you can feel free to get in touch with me with the contact information on the screen and in the description box. Now, one thing I want to preface before going down this list, right? None of these items, at least not most of them, will break your back in of themselves, right? So if your condo has one of these views or one of these exposures, or a condo you're looking at, you have to take it within context of all the other qualities that building has. If it matches 8 out of the 10 items on your criteria, but one of the items that is a negative point is one of these views, well, then you can actually consider that unit because it has so much good. It has a bad exposure, but as I said in this hypothetical, it has like 8 out of the 10 things you want. However, they will reflect negatively on resale value down the line. They will be accounted for when people do the comps. And in a perfect world, these exposures are better avoided. Okay, let's start. And these are not ordered in any particular way. Let's just go through the list. Number 1. This is particularly for the downtown Toronto condo buyer. Those who are looking to purchase Toronto condos within the downtown Toronto condo market, particularly the southernmost portions of the downtown Toronto condo market. And that is the Gardiner Expressway. That's right. One of the views, one of the exposures you should make sure to avoid as a Toronto condo buyer is the view of the Gardiner Expressway. This is particularly the case if you're on a lower floor, right? The higher you up, the less of an issue it is. So there are certain buildings, let's take for instance 11 Brunel. In that building, the units that have southern exposure are exposed to the Gardiner Expressway. But if you're on the 50th floor or the 30th floor, not only do you not hear the Gardiner Expressway, it's actually kind of hard to see it. You would have to actually look down, right? But any floor lower than, like, let's say 20, like the 15, 10, 8, lowest floors, it's an absolute avoid in my opinion. And that's just one example. So as you see right now, I have the Google Maps open for downtown Toronto, and this yellow thing you see here is the Gardiner Expressway. And it impacts a various different set of buildings and areas. You're talking as west as some of the Fort York buildings and City Place buildings, going all the way to some more central buildings, right? Like for instance, this building you see here in the middle right now is 10 York Street. It's one of the best buildings in downtown Toronto. Yet some northern and western facing units will be impacted by the direct exposure to the Gardiner Expressway. And then for instance, these two you have are the harbor building, the harborfront buildings 88 and 100 Harbor. They're not as good as 10 York. However, they're much better than a lot of, I would say, City Place buildings, on even footing with some of the Fort York buildings. Yet nonetheless, these on the lower floors will be impacted by the direct exposure to the Gardiner Expressway. Of course, here you have the ICE condos, which are a story in of themselves, and don't need any more help having some problems. But a lot of decent buildings are impacted by this, right? Even some, I would say, Queens Quay buildings, right? The Queens Quay buildings are really good buildings. They might be a bit older, they might be a bit outdated, right? Not all of them, but I would say 60% of them, but they're really good buildings nonetheless. And once again, some of them are negatively impacted by direct exposure to the Gardiner Expressway. And this is one of those items where if your unit is flush with the Gardiner Expressway, it's kind of going to hurt you a lot. I hate to tell you. Anyways, moving on, let's go to number 2. Another exposure, another view that Toronto condo buyers should do their best to avoid if possible, which is train track. Now, the thing about train tracks is that it's not just the view, right? It's obviously more so the noise. And here we're mainly talking about Liberty Village and once again, parts of central downtown Toronto. And other areas we can discuss with regards to train tracks being a primary point of consideration in terms of view and exposure are areas as west as Etobicoke, central Etobicoke, or as unrelated and further north as some parts of Richmond Hill. Believe it or not, some parts of Richmond Hill, some older condos in Richmond Hill may have issues with proximity to train tracks. But let's use Liberty Village as an example, right? That is the primary concern here, right? Some Liberty Village buildings that are not so good with regards to their exposure to the train tracks, and obviously not all units, right? Only the units that are exposed to the tracks are buildings such as 55 East Liberty, 75 East Liberty, 65 East Liberty. Now, some buildings can get away with it, right? Such as 8 The Esplanade, right? 8 The Esplanade is right by Union Station. And most reasonable buyers know that, they're making a compromise, right? If they're buying an 8 The Esplanade, and this is just an example, they're trading off proximity in terms of convenience to Union Station for the potential of, trains being a problem in terms of noise. Even in that instance, 8 The Esplanade, of course, you should try to get as high as possible if height is not a factor or deterrent to avoid the noise problems. Nonetheless, though, buildings like that get away with it somewhat. Liberty Village buildings, on the other hand, the units that are exposed to the train tracks or close to the train tracks, or even some buildings outside of Liberty Village, like 18 Yonge Street or 16 Yonge Street, right? Those have a harder time of getting away with it, or at least in my experience on the ground as a Toronto real estate agent, I have seen the proximity to train tracks impact those units more negatively in those buildings. Moving forward, number 3, the third thing you should try your best to avoid in terms of view or exposure as a Toronto condo buyer or potential Toronto homeowner who's going to own a condo for a long time are hydro lines. We all know what hydro lines look like. And this particularly is something that impacts the North York condo market because there's a long stretch of hydro lines around the Finch area spanning east to west. And this is an example of what I'm talking about, right? These hydro lines here. Now, around the Yonge and Finch intersection, right, they really afflict just a couple of buildings, right? You have some of these buildings here, right, at the intersection of Yonge and Finch. But other than those immediate buildings around the Yonge and Finch intersection, if they're not directly looking at the hydro lines, it's okay. However, further east, for example, right, if you go towards the Bayview side of North York, particularly around the Bayview and Cummer, this is an example that's top of mind with regards to this condo building because I've done a lot of business in this building, sold a lot of units in this building, which is the building in question is 3237 Bayview, which is a relatively new building. And this here is the building in question. These, as you can see, what appears to be this green path right beside the building are actually, once again, another stretch of hydro lines. And let me pull up an example of a listing. And you have one here, for instance, you see the first picture of this listing. This is 3237 Bayview again. You see the hydro lines clear as day here. And going through the pictures here, once again, for example, you see in this picture, you see the hydro lines once again clearly visible. Anyways, let's move on to number 4. Number 4, the fourth thing you should do your best to avoid as a Toronto condo buyer is if your unit is directly exposed to the loading docks of your building or the adjacent building. By loading docks, it's exactly what you think. Is the loading zone corridor for deliveries, for trucks to make deliveries in terms of supplies, or worst case scenario, actually, if that loading corridor is also where they remove the garbage in terms of the municipal garbage trucks. And to show you an example of this one, let's pause the video quickly here because this is a condo view that you should probably avoid if possible, because when your unit's exposure is directly exposed to the loading zone or the loading corridor for that condo building or the condo building next to you, despite the unit itself being a great unit, which in this case I was viewing it with my clients and we like the unit itself, the view can actually become a problem. Think about all the trucks backing up. Think about early mornings when there is deliveries. I mean, trucks are loud. Garbage trucks, especially if that's where they load and unload the garbage, is especially loud with their mechanical arms. So this can be a headache down the line. As always, for more on the Toronto condo market, follow me for more. And as I mentioned in that video, it could be a headache for several reasons, right? The sound of the truck in the morning, and if it's a garbage truck, those loud, thunderous mechanical arms. And those are gonna wake you up at odd hours. And besides that, there could also be a smell issue. Although in that case, I highly doubt that the smell would have been much of an issue, but otherwise it's not a pretty sight to look at anyways. Moving forward, the next item, the next exposure you should most likely avoid as a Toronto condo buyer, which are parking lots. That's right, parking lots, especially in very high dense parts of the city. Whether we're talking about Midtown, North York, Downtown, West Toronto, East Toronto, and Scarborough, even some areas in York Region, in Markham, Richmond Hill, and Vaughan. This is primarily for two reasons. Number one, if your unit is directly exposed to a parking lot on a lower floor, once again, a common theme, lower floors being impacted the most. But if your unit is exposed to the parking lot, and here when I say parking lot, I mean public parking, not the overground parking of the building, although that's an issue of itself, well, noise is going to be a problem, right? What if people are coming to pick up the cars at 4, car alarms going off, people just chit-chatting in the parking lot? But that's the minor concern. The major concern is its potential for future development, especially if the parking lot that might be developed in the future will completely obstruct your unit. For this, I would like to use the following building as an example, 238 Doris Avenue, although there's plenty other buildings out there that would also suffice as great examples. Let's take a look. This is the building in question, and it's a really good building, a really good, nice end user building. The location is absolutely fantastic. I'm a huge fan of the Doris buildings. Doris is the street that's parallel to Yonge Street, and for the North York condo market, in the Yonge and Shepherd, Yonge and Finch area, there's a lot of good buildings on Doris. But the reason this is problematic is when we take a look at the map view, the 3D view, we see some units here on Doris are facing directly to this parking lot. If you're a big fan of Canton Ramen or go to Last Man Square often, you would recognize this parking lot. And I was recently viewing a unit in that building that was a pretty decent unit, one of the better units we saw with that particular buyer of mine. Yet nonetheless, it was directly exposed to that parking lot. And guess what? We noticed a notice for development on the parking lot. And guess what? The ensuing construction that was to come on that parking lot would completely and utterly obstruct the exposure of the unit we were looking at. In this case, we were lucky enough to catch the proposal, those billboards you see. They provide the details of what's to be constructed, what is proposed, the height, the number of stories. So we were lucky to catch that. But in some instances, if you're buying a unit that's directly exposed to a parking lot, that lot may remain a lot for the next 3 years, but who knows, 4 years down the line, a developer will purchase the lot and try to build on that lot. So there aren't any current proposals as of the time you're buying it. So you're taking a risk for the future. Or furthermore, you might just not catch the fact that the parking lot that's exposed to your unit currently is subject to a proposal for future development, right? You might not catch it or you might not walk around the building. Now, this is going to be inevitable at some point, right? Ultimately, the city of Toronto is getting more dense as we go along, and most parking lots will be developed in the coming years. That's a separate discussion for where we're going to actually park our cars or where we're going to actually fill up on gas, because gas stations are also slowly disappearing in the downtown core and the midtown core. To a certain extent, you know, if you are purchasing a unit that's high up and it's, you know, directly exposed to a parking lot, if the parking lot is far away or it's not completely covering your entire unit, or it's the case that not all your windows in your unit is exposed to the parking lot, sure, there will be some construction, but it's not going to break your back. It's just going to be annoying while the construction is occurring. There's going to be dust, there's going to be noise, but ultimately it is the city of Toronto. It's a very dense city. Once again, if it's a good unit in a good building, you take good care of it and you bought it at a good price and you sell it in a seller-friendly market, you undoubtedly, even despite the fact that will be a building next door on that parking lot, you'll undoubtedly be able to sell it at a profit. Once again, all things being equal, and you're not selling it during construction. But if the upcoming tower or commercial building that is going to be built upon that parking lot is going to obstruct all of your unit and it's going to be very close, I mean, like sometimes in some instances within touching distance, then of course it's going to be a very big issue down the road. So this is going to be a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, better avoid it if possible. Next up, dumpsters and alleys. And I'll make this one quick because it's pretty self-explanatory, right? This is particularly, once again, with downtown Toronto condos. Of course, you'll have examples of this in North York and Midtown. Yet, nonetheless, due to the simple fact that the city of Toronto is very dense, if that's not the millionth time I've mentioned that in this video, I apologize. Naturally, a lot of lower floor units in the most highly saturated intersections or areas of the downtown Toronto or Midtown Toronto condo market. Now, there are too many examples to just pick one. I've seen many lower floor units in many buildings that actually had this problem of, you know, your balcony, you're looking straight out into an alleyway and there's dumpsters there. But one that sticks out and is top of mind are units in 25 Richmond Street. It's a really good building, once again, by Great Golf, although it's not their best work. You know, Great Golf is one of my favorite builders within the city of Toronto and the Toronto real estate market. 25 Richmond is an okay building by a great builder, but nonetheless, for some reason, weirdly, the units I saw last year with my client in that building for studios stick out, where it was directly exposed to the dumpster and alleyways. And hey, if you're a flexible individual and those things don't really impact your enjoyment of the property, who am I to say to avoid it? But I can tell you, for resale value purposes, in a moderate to cool market, it's going to hurt. Seller-friendly market or at a really hot market, it's not going to hurt you that much. But ideally, once again, if you can avoid it, better than not. The next view exposure that a buyer should do their best to avoid with regards to the Toronto condo market would be if your unit is directly exposed to the overground pool or some of the common areas, some of the amenities. Imagine in the summertime, you're relaxing, you know, you're trying to get some sleep, and guess what? The patio portion of your condo building is right in front of you, in front of your balcony. The noise will seep into your unit. There's no question about that. For example, here I will use the King Blue condos on Blue Jays Way. Some of the units in that building, I believe units above the 15th floor, are overlooking the outdoor patio area. In this case, not an outdoor pool or anything, but the barbecue area or the outdoor hosting area. Lastly, a view Toronto condo buyers should avoid is if the unit you're looking at is directly exposed to a building that's very close. So meaning the building is so close that you have very little to zero natural sunlight or views. Now, this is the case, for instance, with one of my favorite buildings, actually, one of the best buildings in downtown, 250 and 270 Wellington Street West. These buildings are Tridel buildings, the Icon 1 and 2. Those are the names of the buildings. Really great, really good buildings in every other aspect. Unfortunately, though, some northern facing units are really close to a new building that was just constructed. And let me show you. Here we're looking at 250 Wellington, right? And as you can see, in the northern exposure. This map is outdated, but what you see here is construction of a building on Mercer. And that construction of that building completely obstructs some of the views in 250 and 270 Wellington Street West. And despite the Wellington buildings being really good buildings that still have appreciation value, they're still going to grow, and they have shown the fact that they're going to grow despite this problem. The appreciation value, though, is going to be more limited due to this fact. Anyways, that is it for today's video. Views and exposures Toronto condo buyers should do their best to avoid if possible. Let me know if you have any further questions or if you have any other suggestions. There probably is a couple of other views and exposures I would generally tell people to stay away from, but simply didn't have time for it in this video. As always, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned, and yeah, have a great day. Thank you.